China panic, the U.S. and Japan sends military troops really land to Senkaku Island. Last week Lieutenant General Kevin Schneider, the commander of U.S. forces based in Japan, launched the U.S. Japanese exercise Keen Sword 21 with words to that effect. Keen Sword brings together units from all 4 U.S. military services together with their brethren from the Japan Self-Defense Forces (JSDF). Announced General Schneider on board a Japanese warship, the Allied force demonstrated the ability to move a few people around Japan's southwestern islands. But he added that the same capability could be used to deploy combat troops to defend the Senkaku Islands or respond to other crises and contingencies. Schneider's specific mention of the Senkakus was telling. Let's speculate about what a deployment to the uninhabited islets, which adjoin Japan's Ryukyu Islands but constitute an archipelago distinct from the Ryukyus, might look like. Start with the extreme case. If troops alighted on the Senkakus, would they build a permanent base? Doubtful, though less doubtful than in the past. After all, China's island and base building project in the South China Sea proves that engineers can transmogrify unlikely sites into military facilities given enough labor, resources, and political resolve. Tokyo and Washington could afford Beijing the sincerest form of flattery, and without exerting the same degree of effort. After all, the Senkakus already exist. Allied civil engineers would doubtless improve the terrain in the interest of withstanding air, missile, or amphibian attack. They would have no need to manufacture the substructure for a base out of reefs, atolls, or the seafloor the way Chinese engineers excavated in the South China Sea. In that sense, planting an installation on the islets would be easy and straightforward. If soldiers from China's People's Liberation Army (PLA) ensconced themselves in the archipelago, they would hold a flanking position within striking range of Taiwan and the midsection of Asia's first island chain. Wresting control of the Senkakus from Japan would not deliver Taiwan into Beijing's hands or fracture the first island chain all by itself, but PLA strategists might deem it a useful incremental gain that hastens China toward those goals. We can debate whether the Allies will or should fortify the islands. You can bet China's military would give it a go once in possession of them. And strength? By that Mayan means a site's defenses, natural or man-made. Islands have moats, while opposed amphibious landings rank among the most difficult of military operations. Defenders can dig into the Pacific Islands, helping them stubbornly resist an assault. Imperial Japan raised island defense to high and bloody art during World War II. Democratic Japan could try to replicate the imperial legacy, showing Chinese commanders they cannot seize ground in the Senkakus without a lengthy and pricey slog fraught with peril. Beijing could desist from the attempt if suitably impressed. Japan already controls the Senkaku Islands, simplifying the strategically offensive part of Moltke's formula. Landing forces and keeping them there would satisfy the tactically defensive part. Adding U.S. troops to a composite U.S. Japanese garrison would certify that Washington has skin in the game of honoring its treaty commitments to Tokyo, much as stationing a U.S. Army brigade in Berlin put Soviet bloc leaders on notice that America would fight for the encircled city. Unless Tokyo takes active measures to defend the Senkakus, the Japan Coast Guard will remain their chief protector. But entrusting military defense to a law enforcement body makes no sense if Beijing resolves to make its move. The PLA Navy would simply brush aside lightly armed Japanese cutters. That being the case, it will be up to the self-defense forces to tap the island's natural defenses, much as wise armed forces fortify major bases to ward off the seaborne or airborne assault. Whether the JSDF should act is a political decision to be made in Tokyo in consultation with Washington. Logistics, then, poses a forbidding hurdle to erecting a standing military base in the archipelago. The sad plight of Philippine Marines who uphold Manila's claim to sovereignty over 2nd Thomas Shoal through their physical presence underlines the problem. A handful of Marines live on board a decrepit U.S.-built amphibious transport deliberately grounded there. They endure a constant siege by Chinese vessels, which use their hulls to block out resupply shipments in hopes of starving out the contingent. The Philippine Armed Forces have to go to extravagant lengths to run stores past the blockade. Ground Self-Defense Force commanders envision 3 key steps in remote islands defense, namely prepositioning units, rapidly deploying units, and recapturing invaded islands. Reasonably enough, their concept of operations anticipates a range of contingencies. It holds out the possibility of multi-keen operations in which Japanese soldiers take the initiative, entrenching themselves on southwestern islands, perhaps even the Senkakus, as a preemptive measure. Then they would defend the islands against assault from a position of strength. The leaner the force, the better, in case the PLA disputes airborne or seaborne resupply efforts with some measure of success. Recapturing invaded islands, on the other hand, is a more hazardous prospect. It assumes the JSDF has surrendered the advantage to PLA forces that abided by Moltke's logic, rushing to the contested ground first and mounting a tactical defense of their own. And that is certainly a possibility unless Tokyo is prepared to garrison all of the southwestern islands ahead of time. Accordingly, it's worth thinking ahead now about how to impose logistical nightmares on China after it grabs real estate. Meanwhile, the U.S. Armed Forces have embraced the U.S. Marine Corps' emerging concept of Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, which envisions small bodies of missile-armed troops flitting from island to island in the winsome amphibious craft. Controlling turf is a worthy goal in its own right, but Marine commanders mainly anticipate using islands as firing platforms for mobile anti-ship and anti-air weaponry. Nimble amphibious forces will be hard to uproot from their island bastions even as they make things tough on hostile forces that dare to come within reach.